Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. She just published a book on Amazon yesterday. If you're watching this on my channels, YouTube, X, Rumble, Rockfin, you'll see the cover of her new book. The full title is Hands Off My Food: How to Defend Your Food, Health, and Freedom. And her name is Dr. Sina McCullough. It's McCullough. And she has a forward by Dr. Eric Berg. I always watch his videos online. He's all over my social media on really informative stuff. So it's cool that to see his name associated with this book. We were talking the pre-show about this. We're going to talk about stuff that's very current, actually. Strangely, I think happened after we scheduled this interview, which is this executive order about glyphosate, which is not safe. But there's a lot to talk about, like our food. We're talking the pre-show too. Like me and my food choices and buying is like, is this food real? Like now I read the labels and they have weird additives in my bread, and I can tell the difference of the food if I go to like a craft bakery as opposed to buying stuff at Costco. Quality is, I mean, it's like two sides of the spectrum. But she can talk more about that. So, Dr. Sina McCullough, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. For people who haven't heard your name, maybe not familiar with the book, can you talk about your background, your research? I know that there's an iteration of this book a while back. Maybe you can talk about that, and then your research leading up to this particular book, Hands Off My Food.
Sure, I'd love to. So, my PhD is in nutrition from UC Davis. And so I'm supposed to really be an expert in food. But what happened was I almost died largely from eating food. I got super sick. It didn't happen overnight, of course. It happened about over 20 years. And the whole time I sought help from medical doctors, and nobody could figure out what was happening. I mean, it started with gastrointestinal symptoms. I could eat a food one week and I was okay. And then the next week I'd eat that same food and I would have gas and bloating and just buckled over in cramps. And it got worse from there. So first I saw a Western doctor and he wanted to prescribe Tagamet for me to consume every time I ate food. And I said to him, look, a pill is not the answer. And this, again, I was like 20 years old. But even at that time, I knew there had to be a root cause behind what's causing this problem. And I didn't want to just pop a pill. So I kept seeking answers, one doctor after the next. And meanwhile, my symptoms continued to get worse. I developed chronic sinus infections, which of course they wanted to just give me antibiotics for that. I developed bumps on my arms, a laundry list of foods that I became sensitive to. I developed a tumor on my eye, which was very scary because you don't want to be blinded. I saw a specialist for that. Nobody had any answers, but they could guarantee me that the tumor would continue to grow over my cornea and would eventually blind me. So that was helpful. And then the worst thing that happened to me, in my opinion, was I had 5 miscarriages. And we couldn't figure out why any of this was happening. And again, I kept asking for help from the medical system for 20 years while this was going on. The last specialist I saw told me that all these symptoms had to be in my head because they couldn't figure out a reason. So at that point, I knew I was on my own. If I wanted to heal from any of this, then I needed to find my own solutions. My husband and I became co-detectives. We scoured the scientific literature. He has a PhD in chemical engineering, so we were actually a great team. And together we figured out that I probably had leaky gut, or increased intestinal permeability. And we theorized that it was caused from eating, chemicals like glyphosate and GMOs and different additives, for example, in our food supply. And, this was a long time ago. This was back when leaky gut wasn't in the mainstream narrative anymore. We found it in the scientific literature. So what happened was I went gluten-free, or what we think is gluten-free, if we trust the certified gluten-free label. And I got better for a little bit, and then I got worse. I tried everything that I could think of, everything I was trained to do nutritionally. So the GAPS diet, the paleo diet, the Candida diet, diet elimination reintroduction, all these things. And I would get better and I would get worse. I ate everything from scratch, everything was organic, and I was still going downhill. So, what eventually happened was my entire family got the flu and they all recovered in a couple days. And I spiraled downhill where I had to go to the emergency room. It was really bad. At that point, I had hit rock bottom. I spent most of my time lying on the floor because I was too weak to sit up. My ribs hurt every time I took a breath in. It felt like my ribs were going to crack. My teeth hurt when I chewed food, like my teeth were going to fall out. I mean, at one point, I was so weak and in so much pain that I couldn't even wrap my hand around a cup. I remember my oldest son, he's now 16. He was probably around 5 at the time. And he would have to come over and literally hold a glass of water with a straw up to my mouth just so I can drink as I was laying on the floor. So again, nobody had any answers. I'm trying to figure it out on my own. So I would spend anywhere between 40 and 60 hours a week listening to these free online health summits. This was the cutting edge information that we had at the time. And I was literally listening to these to try to piece together this puzzle and save my life so that my kids didn't have to grow up without a mother. And one day, a piece of the puzzle came to me, and basically, it changed everything for me. It changed my entire approach to what I believed and the approach to what I thought healing was. And I rapidly healed. I mean, I would say in about 3 days of figuring out the final food triggers, I was off the floor. In about 3 months, I was actually outside pulling bushes out of the ground. And in about 1 year, there were no measurable signs of disease, inflammation, anything in my body. So I learned the body can heal rapidly. Ultimately, what I ended up being diagnosed with was a severe state of rheumatoid arthritis, which was really shocking because it developed when I was in my 30s, way too young. I had arsenic poisoning. We think it was largely from consuming rice in the gluten-free products. And I was severely deficient in about 15 different micronutrients, so deficient in 2B vitamins that I was actually borderline for beriberi and pellagra, which we don't really hear about those diseases anymore because they were largely eradicated in the United States by the 1950s. But we're seeing a resurgence of these micronutrient deficiency diseases. And one thing I want to say off the bat is I used to formulate supplements. Like I was the director of research and development for a supplement company. So I know the best of the best supplements out there. I consumed a supplement practically every day while I was sick, and I was still nutrient deficient. And this is common now. And it's partly because our gastrointestinal systems are so challenged like we're having leaky gut, for instance, and dysbiosis.
IBS is all over the place. Yeah.
That's right. IBS was the first diagnosis I ever got, which is a catch-all group, meaning we don't know what's wrong with you, But this is very common. We're running into this problem where not only is the food less nutrient dense than it used to be, but our bodies are having a more difficult time digesting and absorbing these nutrients. So even though I was consuming that almost every day, I was still deficient in 15 nutrients, and the Western test couldn't pick it up. This is really what helped me, was realizing that, okay, we have this system that has these Western tests, and most of them are archaic. What I learned about was functional testing. It's entirely different. And so using these functional tests, they were able to pick up these nutrient deficiencies. Whereas in the Western doctor's office, I tested negative for all nutrient deficiencies. So part of it is the system is so behind that we're not getting the answers that we really need to be able to heal ourselves. And the other part, we can go into the problems with the food supply. But so what happened was what I had learned saved my life. it reversed this condition. And I thought, I can't be the only one out there that's suffering from this, and this was, so the book was first published, the first version of it was published 9 years ago, and it took me 5 years to write it, right? So this was almost 15 years ago. And I thought, other people have to be suffering from this too. And if there's an opportunity for me to help them get their second chance at life, I have to write this book. So I did. I wrote down what I had learned about the corruption, the toxins in the food supply. I explained how we got to the food supply that we have today. And the goal is to empower people, to explain our role in the food system, and help you harness your power so that we can take back our health and so that we can create a healthy, thriving food system so that we all don't have to go through what I went through.
Right. I think it's an epidemic. I really do. I think that
It is.
more millions and millions of people are affected by this, if not tens or hundreds,
Mhm.
because you're just getting food and the labeling's off and the names are different. And it happened over time. And this industrial aspect and growth in industrial food sourcing has changed everything and trying to keep stuff on shelves, whatever it'll take to keep on shelves, or this glyphosate that we were talking in the pre-show, like they spray it on all the food. So you have these, doctors who are trained in this allopathic medicine that aren't even addressing these systems. It's probably not even in the medical literature, I would assume. Like, hey, at UC Davis, medical facility, talk about glyphosate and its effect on humanity. Like, wow. And you go back and then it's like GMO and it's Bill Gates and all that stuff, and it makes perfect sense, especially in the context of the Epstein files. So,
Yeah. Yeah, most medical schools don't teach doctors much about nutrition at all. I mean, if medical doctors are lucky, they might get, 10 hours or so of lessons on nutrition. And even then, it's probably going to be related to the dietary guidelines. you know, it's not going to be the things that are actually helpful to us. It's not going to be teaching them these are the toxins in the food supply that you need to teach your patients how to avoid so they can heal. Like we don't see that on the label. It cracks me up when we have this nutrition facts panel with the fat and the total fat and the saturated fat and protein, and the calories. And really, at the end of the day, none of that actually matters. We want what's on the label, that we want to put on the label the things that matter to our health, such as, could you imagine if on this label they said contains glyphosate, a patented antibiotic and metal chelator, or contains GMOs, or grown in sewage sludge? Like, those are the things that we want to know about our food, right? Because learning about calories, that's irrelevant. A calorie is not a calorie. I mean, we've shown this scientifically even. A calorie of broccoli is not the same as a calorie of Coca-Cola. They act completely differently in the body. So a lot of that information that is mandated to be on those labels is actually not even useful for us. We need to have labels that tell us the toxins that are in and on the foods.
it's just another mislabeling by the government. Like, it's just almost deceptive. Like, who cares? Like, you're getting a calorie of something like with high fructose corn syrup or something. Like, these are horrible ingredients. They're just suffused. And if you go into a 7-Eleven, it's like a bioweapons facility. I'm not exaggerating. Like, you have stuff in there and these chips and things that blow your mind. Like, you would need it. Like, if you knew, like, some of this, I forgot which ingredient is built in like toxic sludge. It's some kind of like sweetener or something like that, right? I don't
Yeah, I
remember.
mean, yeah, I mean, in this, the sewage sludge has been tested, and there's many different chemicals in it, including heavy metals, which again, most people are deficient in at least one micronutrient, and they are toxic in at least either heavy metals and or mycotoxins. Like, these are some of our biggest triggers that we have today. So to heal the body, you really need to detox from these toxins at the same time that you're replenishing nutrients that you've lost. I mean, this is the magical formula for being able to reverse the chronic or autoimmune disease. But it's hard to do that in our current culture because the labels are not transparent. I mean, you mentioned the glyphosate issue. I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about that because
Yes,
that's
yeah. I mean, Trump just had some executive order, right? You were telling me that.
yes, the executive order that came through on glyphosate, which basically enshrines glyphosate as part of our national defense. So, Bayer, who now owns glyphosate, came out and basically said all these people have been suing us because they're saying our glyphosate got them sick, and in some cases they're winning these lawsuits. And so they tried to come out with these immunity shields at the state level to protect them from lawsuits. And now they've been trying at the federal level through the Farm Bill to create an immunity shield for these pesticides, not just glyphosate, but all these pesticides. And they came out and said, well, we might go bankrupt. So, we are not going to be able to give you your glyphosate anymore. So Trump stepped in and basically, and this is debated now, this is going to go to, different attorneys and whatnot, but in essence gave glyphosate immunity by saying we need it. It's part of our national defense. And so people are really outraged, up in arms. And we can go into why glyphosate is so bad, and we need to try to not consume it. But to finish this point, I think that while people are outraged, and a lot of people in the Maha movement, for example, they feel betrayed. And I can understand that. But here's the thing. This glyphosate executive order is really, in my opinion, a wake-up call because it's evidence that the expectations that many people have of government can't be achieved. They're actually misplaced expectations. So this executive order reveals two hard truths to all Americans. The first is our food supply has become dependent on the very chemicals and GMOs that are making us sick, because glyphosate and GMOs go hand in hand. Number two, our food system has become so complex that even someone in DC with the best intentions probably won't get anything done because it's getting tangled in the tentacles that is our government. The government is actually functionally limited. So while people can continue to fight for government reform, do not put all your eggs in that basket. There is regulatory capture. There is a revolving door. There's backdoor deals. There's corruption. There's loopholes. And I cover all that in the book. But those things are going to exist. I know people want Kennedy to stop those things, and stop the corporate capture, but that is government. That is in our history. He's not going to be able to stop that. If Kennedy actually does nothing else, like if he can't get anything else pushed through, I think that's fine because, first of all, I'm libertarian. But second, Kennedy's most important contribution to the food movement is that he has brought a level of awareness that nobody else has ever been able to achieve. He has brought the level of awareness to the issues with our food supply. I mean, Dr. Latipo in Florida is doing something very similar with all the testing he's come out with baby formula and showing heavy metals in that.
Right.
Then he went on to candy. 60% of all popular candies they tested had high arsenic levels. And then they just did it with glyphosate in commonly purchased breads, including Dave's bread that's organic, right? So we need this awareness so people can actually use their power in the marketplace. So I see this executive order as actually an opportunity for Americans to wake up and realize the real solution is we, the people. So where we shine is actually understanding the role that we were meant to play in that system. And this is one thing that I briefly discussed in the book, is that, a former FDA commissioner once admitted that what the FDA is doing and what the public thinks it's doing are as different as night and day. So most Americans actually don't understand how the FDA works. It was never designed to be a nursery to protect us. It was actually designed to facilitate a marketplace where you are the final judge. So if we go back in history just a little bit, just before the FDA officially existed, there was a man by the name of Dr. Harvey Wiley. He worked for the government. He created a poison squad, right? I mean, that just sounds like a bad idea to begin with, but there's a poison squad. He fed young, healthy men increasing doses of preservatives like formaldehyde and borax. He wanted to prove that these preservatives were toxic. I mean, these men got like debilitatingly sick. But those experiments led Wiley to actually establishing the food principles that became our national food laws. That one of those three principles that he established was the companies are responsible for the safety of foods and chemicals that they make. So people are all up in arms, for example, about the grass loophole, generally recognized as safe, where companies have been self-affirming the chemicals that they make, and they've affirmed them as safe for us to consume. So in other words, FDA doesn't actually review these chemicals. They don't test them for safety. They don't monitor them. The chemical companies determine that they're safe, and it's optional if they even want to tell the FDA that they're adding these chemicals to our food supply. Well, people are all up in arms and like, oh, how could this be? Well, they don't actually realize that's actually one of the founding principles of the FDA. And that was back in the early 1900s. So, but here's the second half of that coin. Yes, the companies are responsible for determining the safety of the foods and chemicals that they put in our food supply, but the citizens were always meant to be the watchdog. So our job in this system is to keep the government and the industry in check by having the final say through our purchasing power. And that's what Americans used to do. Before we had the FDA, your safety net was your relationship with your farmer and the local shopkeeper. You know, the net was active vigilance. But then the FDA was born in 1906, and that government seal of approval caused this unintended shift in the American psyche. Safety laws were getting passed, and it lulled Americans into this false sense of security, and they began to blindly trust their food. We stopped being watchdogs because we believed we were being watched over. So when we traded that our local eye for a bureaucratic safety net, that safety net was actually full of holes. But because the net existed, we stopped looking for the holes. So I call this, there was like a veil of unearned trust that fell down over the eyes of Americans as soon as we got this bureaucratic agency. And that veil has been passed down from generation to generation like a family heirloom. It's keeping us sick, it's keeping us disempowered, and it's making a lot of people wait for this top-down rescue that was actually never part of the deal. So like government's part of the problem, industry's part of the problem, you know, but the thing is, in the FDA's own documents, they actually state that the people are the solution. They
Oh,
openly
interesting.
state,
Wow.
yeah, they openly state that if we don't demand safer food through our purchases, the market has no incentive to provide it. So you could say, oh, well, the FDA's stance is just a convenient excuse for the agency to do nothing, you know, but it's a confession. I mean, they told us the rules. We are supposed to selectively give our consent with every single food purchase. We are not passive consumers. So we don't need to sit kind of in this victim space, right? This is an empowering situation because it means that we, the consumers, are the ones that help patch the holes in the safety net. And we do that through our choices because every dollar you spend matters. So we have to feed the good and starve the bad companies. You know, and my veil was so thick for most of my life that that's why I got sick. Like I would walk into the grocery store and trust the food that was on the grocery store shelves because I thought, well, someone's got to be testing that for safety if it's
You
on the
assume
shelf,
it, right? You assume
right?
these things, much like the FDA or all these other things. You assume it, and then you realize, no, they're not testing anything. They didn't test the vaccines on any of this stuff. So this is a food is part of this whole kind of call it negligence or just complete oblivion and like overseeing all this stuff. And then the real kind of like systemic thing is you go to a doctor, a third party to get advice, and he doesn't know anything either. So
That's
he doesn't,
right.
so it's like, wow. So how do you find, like, your book is the solution? The stuff you're talking about is the solution. Because there's a lot of toxic food. Glyphosate is sprayed on the stuff is a herbicide, right? I mean, I heard my understanding is like all this weed and stuff is just like literally industrial level spraying like on a huge thing all over our food. It's incredible.
Yes. So glyphosate is one of the active ingredients in Roundup, and most people probably have heard of Roundup because a lot of people spray it on their in their yards. So it's not just sprayed in food; it's sprayed in landscaping, golf courses, people's yards, schools, playgrounds. All over the place. It is the most used herbicide in the entire world. Um, roughly
And
two.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
And the lawsuits. There's been lawsuits where people have won millions of dollars for it causing their cancer. Like I remember it's the African American guy sued and won. So
That's right, and the lawsuits just keep coming. I mean, look, glyphosate is so ubiquitous, now in the world that biomonitoring shows that 70 to 90% of Americans have detectable levels of glyphosate in their urine. It's also detected in placentas of pregnant women. It can bioaccumulate in your bones and in your bone marrow, which can slowly release over time, providing a near constant source of internal exposure. It's been classified as a probable human carcinogen by the World Health Organization. Numerous studies have linked it to not only leaky gut, but anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, ALS, MS, liver disease, kidney disease. I mean, the list goes on and on.
just
Enough.
chronic disease. It just causes chronic disease of all different types. That's the whole
Yes.
thing, is that it doesn't express itself in one thing. So somebody may get one type of negative outcome and then the other person get it. So it's not like everybody gets brain cancer at the same time. So it's harder to kind of sense this overall kind of chronic disease and chronic exposure, really, is my
Yeah.
guess.
Yes, yes, it really is because these things accumulate in the body and everyone has their own tipping point, right? And everybody has their own what we would say almost like a weak point in the body where once you have chronic inflammation, that's where you're going to see dis-ease, present itself. Glyphosate has become even more damaging in the recent years because not only is it used on crops. So, for instance, like I said, it goes hand in hand with GMOs because most GMOs out there currently that are food GMOs are actually engineered to resist glyphosate, meaning you can spray it directly on the plant and it won't kill the plant. Okay. So we had that going on. Then what they realized is, oh, we can use glyphosate as a pre harvest desiccant. So what they started to do was since the 1990s, farmers will spray it on like conventional cereals and legumes like wheat, oats, barley, edible beans. And sometimes they spray it on the crop 1 to 2 weeks before the harvest. And that's so that they can dry down the crop evenly, right? So this is for an economic incentive. It's not a nutritive incentive. It's not making the plant healthier. But what happens is when you spray it that close to harvest, it can lead to even higher residue levels on the food, right? Compared to if they applied it earlier in the growing season. So more residues can show up on that food that you actually eat, causing more damage. Um, so, it's really this issue of we have many different toxins in the food supply that people are even largely unaware of the prevalence and the toxicity of them. And then we have a repeated pattern of how these different toxins got to the market. So for brevity, oftentimes what happens is you'll have something like GMOs or glyphosate or RBGH, recombinant bovine growth hormone. That was the first genetically engineered growth hormone introduced into our food supply. And so you have those three, for example, and you'll have evidence that they can cause harm. You'll have FDA scientists repeatedly warning that they could put the public in danger. You'll sometimes even have the Government Accountability Office step in and say, oh, we advise against approval. That happened in the RBGH situation. But then you'll have federal regulators that will push it through. And this is where the revolving door comes into place. So, for example, when RBGH was trying to get to be approved, as a drug in the food supply, there was just a handful of people that pushed it through. So there was Michael Taylor, and he was an attorney for a company that represented Monsanto, and Monsanto is the one who made RBGH. Okay. Then Michael Taylor became the vice president of Monsanto. Then he was appointed by President Bush to be the FDA Deputy Commissioner of Policy. And he wrote the guidelines for RBGH, basically saying, if people remember back in the day, this would have been like more in the 80s and 90s, when we found out that they were putting growth hormones in our milk supply. And you would see the label on the milk, which is still there today, for most milk, that there's no difference in milk from cows treated with artificial growth hormone, right? There is a difference, and a court even found that difference, and it's documented in scientific literature that there is a difference, and it could lead to things like prostate cancer, childhood cancers, things like that. But what I'm saying is, because of the revolving door, they got it pushed through. And Michael Taylor, who worked for Monsanto, is the one that got that disclaimer pushed through. And the goal of that was to basically let the American people know your milk is safe. You don't need to go buy that organic milk, right? This milk is actually safe. So they protected the industry in that example. Another reason that RBGH got pushed through was Dr. Margaret Miller. So what happened was, when cows were receiving this recombinant bovine growth hormone, it was making them sicker. And one of the ways in which they got sicker was they were developing mastitis, and inflammation of the udder, and it's very painful, and it can lead to increased pus in the milk and also blood in the milk. And so what happened was, the farmers were having to give them more antibiotics to try to combat it. Well, once that happened, that meant that there was too high of levels of antibiotic residues in the milk. It went over the FDA's limit. So instead of going back to Monsanto and saying, hey, you need to change this product because it's making the cow sick, and it's like exceeding the allowable level in the milk. Instead, we have Margaret Miller, who worked for Monsanto on bovine growth hormone, and then she was appointed to the FDA, where she evaluated the very same research that she conducted while she worked at Monsanto. I mean, you can't even make this up,
It's like a plot. Like, okay, you're going to research it, then we're going to put you in the office, and they're going to okay it. Wow.
That's right. There was another one, Dr. Susan Section. She was a primary reviewer of RBGH. Well, she actually ended up reviewing her own studies, because she conducted studies on Monsanto's RBGH drug when she was a grad student at Cornell. Then the FDA hired her to review her very own studies. And in fact, while she was still working at the FDA, she was publishing articles in support of Monsanto and RBGH. I mean, it's
It's
incredible.
unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've got this revolving door. You got these handful of people in these bureaucratic agencies pushing these things forward. They use very minimal studies. Like RBGH got pushed through based largely on 2 industry-sponsored rat studies,
Wow.
right? This was the primary evidence. Even though most other industrialized nations have banned RBGH, right? But this is the pattern amongst, like, most of these things, these toxic things that are brought to market. So, for example, GMOs, regulations had to be changed again to keep the GMO crops on the market, because there was more. So the technology started to fail of spraying glyphosate directly on the crops. It was taking more glyphosate to do the same job. So the amount of glyphosate on the crops was increasing past the allowable level. So they just changed the level.
Right.
They
Like,
just
there you
bump it
go.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that you can keep on spraying it. Once again, there was no consensus among the FDA scientists. Some of them came forward and were issuing warnings. And guess what happens? When a scientist starts issuing warnings, they get intimidated. Sometimes they get fired, right? They're suppressed. Um, just like RBGH, though, the FDA admitted that there could be problems with it. So if you look through the documents, this is all documented. In the case of GMOs, the FDA even admitted in their own documents that GMOs could introduce new proteins that could that could differ significantly from their food counterparts and could introduce new allergies. Um,
And you
you
have
know,
this epidemic of allergies going on in this country. It's incredible.
yeah, I mean, and then like I said, they intimidated scientists who would read, who spoke out. There's actually the former biotechnology coordinator at the FDA declared that the government policy on GMOs was passed based on politics. He said it was a quote political decision. So like this is all documented, and you can see this, and I document these things in the book as well. You can see this in their own words. There is a clear pattern that is going on here.
It's
And
incredible. The whole food supply is corrupt. That's like everything else is corrupt. That's
it is
just
corrupt.
another thing that's corrupt. So people really have to be aware. I mean, there's just so much corruption, and that they
Yeah.
don't understand. The mass media is part of the problem because they don't go in detail about this stuff. So it's just like we're lab rats. The American people. I don't even think a lot of these regulations, like, they're not allowed the stuff in Europe or Italy. They don't allow RGBH or GMOs, and it's like the food quality. I've heard of people going to Italy and eating it to their heart's content, like all the nice food and pasta, and losing weight because
Yeah.
the food is not toxic.
Yeah.
And so then they come back to the States and they can't get rid of that extra 10 pounds. It's because you're eating stuff that's like toxic. It's just
Yeah,
don't work for
it's not real food.
you. Yeah,
It's
it's not real food.
man-made chemicals that we're eating in this.
Canola
I mean,
oil. And
yeah, I mean, glyphosate itself is, for example, a patented antibiotic. So if you really think about what that means, and it's a broad spectrum antibiotic. So it's going to kill off good bacteria along with bad bacteria. So if you really think about what that means, every time you're eating food that contains glyphosate on it, you are consuming an antibiotic. So what do you
right.
think that's going to do with your microbiome? Right. And now we're learning just
It's gonna
how
throw it off.
critically important the microbiome is for health and longevity. I mean, your microbiome not only helps you digest and absorb nutrients, it makes B vitamins for you. It makes vitamin K. Like it makes serotonin, these different
It's the
neurotransmitters.
brain, yeah, the brain attachment to your microbiome is proven. So,
That's
like, if
right.
your biome's, like, messed up, your brain is not gonna function right. Alzheimer's or whatever kinda neurological thing, it's just so gross.
Yeah, we need those microbes to survive and to actually thrive. So it's been estimated by some scientists that in our modern day, we've lost about 35% of the diversity in our microbiomes, like compared to a hunter-gatherer society. And we know when we lose this diversity, it makes us more susceptible to both chronic and acute illnesses. So if you look at the food supply, we are sterilizing our microbiome into a large extent, because not only are we consuming things like glyphosate, which is a patented antibiotic, but if you look in the grocery store, a lot of the food is sterilized. So chicken, for example, can be treated with chlorine, with bleach,
Right, right, it's
right? Yeah, it's sterilized. We even have like wax. A lot of produce is coated in wax because we don't pick fresh anymore. Like we don't get from local farms that often, right? We're picking unripe fruit, we're shipping it sometimes for hundreds of miles, and it has to maintain, its structural integrity, and it can't rot on these, in these trucks.
right, right.
And then they often will gas them to ripen them, artificially. So we have this wax coating on the outside of them to protect them from bruising, to make sure they don't rot too much. Well, what's in that wax coating? Oftentimes there's fungicides in there. There can be grass chemicals in there, and it's a sterilized, it's more of a sterilized food by the time you actually get it. Processed foods, ultra processed foods, you bet that doesn't have a healthy microbiome on that food. It's very different than the way our ancient ancestors used to eat, where you literally would like pull a carrot out of the ground and it had this rich, diverse microbiome on it and all of these nutrients and micronutrients in it. So it is no wonder that we're getting sicker. We're eating nutrient depleted food that's largely sterilized.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. But you actually have a way to fight back. Like this is like hands off my food, but it's not. I mean, you have to know the problem before you can solve it, right? So
That's
you
right.
do have some solutions.
Oh yeah, every chapter has solutions, and then there's 3 sections in the book, and the whole entire 3rd section is all on solutions.
Right.
So, yeah, I bring up a problem. One of the worst things I think that you can do for somebody is tell them these horrific problems that we're having and then not give them any solutions that are actually practical, things they can actually do, themselves, because you create victims that way. If you're not giving solutions that you can actually do, you're creating victims, and that elicits fear, and fear drives disease. So I don't want people to be in a state of fight or flight. I want to empower you. I want to equip you with the information, with the knowledge, so you're aware. And I want to give you real solutions that you can apply in your everyday life, like free solutions. You don't need to go buy something. Like, here's what I look for in the grocery store, for example. Here's the questions to ask your farmer if that's the route you want to go on. And I do a podcast every week with Joel Salatin from Polyface Farm. We joke around and we say that is really how complex our food supply is, that it takes a farmer and a doctor coming together to explain full circle from soil to disease, like what's happening and what you can do about it.
What's the
And
name of the podcast?
it's called Beyond Labels.
Beyond Labels. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I'll
because you
put a
have
link
to
to that.
go beyond the label
Right, the
to
labels
learn all
are. It's
this.
like a deception thing. It's almost
That's
like
right.
they live. It's like a fake thing. It doesn't mean anything. The whole
Yeah, with all
label
the
is.
pretty pictures and,
Yeah,
oh, look, we have free range chickens. And then you go to the farmer, you look on the website and they're like in CAFOs. I mean, this really
yeah.
happens.
It's just like Dave's. Like used to buy Dave's. I was like, oh, this is great organic bread. Look at this cute, labeling, and he looks natural. And you see Dave on there, and you realize he's not organic. It's fake. It's if you add
Yeah.
this stuff to your like food, it's terrible.
Yeah. And now he does. So that bread did test lower in glyphosate level. So I want to make a quick distinction. Glyphosate is so ubiquitous that it is contaminating some of the organic food supply. And there's a lot of data to actually show that. The Environmental Working Group has data on that. For example, Moms Across America has data on that. So right now, though, when you go to the marketplace, because not everybody's going to go find a local farmer and not everybody has access to a local farmer. Like, ideally, the best situation is you're growing your own and you have a local farmer who you trust. Okay. But not everybody has that. So most of us end up in the grocery store. And I will say the organic label has a lot of loopholes, a lot of them, and we're having contamination issues, but it's still in general less toxic than the conventional options. So I do still opt for the organic. And what I like to do is I pair it, because like I said, we don't really have a lot of time here to go into it, but I talk about it in the book, the loopholes that are in the organic label. What you can do to kind of patch those holes is you can pair it with 2 other labels, which I know this sounds ridiculous, but this is how complicated our food supply is. The one label is the non-GMO project, and that label is a third-party label, and it independently tests the level of GMOs in the foods. So, like the USDA label, they don't really test foods. It's a paper trail. It's you're trusting that Big Ag is checking that box, saying, "Oh yeah, we're not using GMOs, we're not using glyphosate, and so forth." The non-GMO project actually tests. It's a third-party group. So you can look for the butterfly. And then also I pair that with the Detox Project's label. It's a glyphosate glyphosate residue free label. They're again third party. So these are independent companies. Unlike the government, these companies can go out of business because you can hold them accountable if they mess up, right? So it's a third party label. They actually test each ingredient and the final product down to the lowest detectable level we are capable of testing. And that's really important because even if the government did test, like an ingredient, what you really need is the final product because all these ingredients have different levels of glyphosate in them. And what you want to know is, well, how much is in the actual product that I'm actually going to eat? So the Detox Project actually tests the final ingredient. So when I'm in the grocery store, that's what I'm doing. I'm looking for what I call the trio. It's the USDA 100% organic label, because there's not just one organic label from the USDA, paired with the Non-GMO Project's butterfly, paired with the Detox Project glyphosate residue free label. And it's so ridiculous that we even have to do that. But those are three labels that you would actually want to look for on the food package.
Right. It's very important. Do you have time to take a few comments? Some people are commenting. They have some questions for you too. Is that okay?
Sure.
Heart of the Personal Story says she's also a McCullough, so she's giving you a high
Oh, yeah.
high five long distance. So another McCullough's out there.
I love it.
Another 1011-9 that says, can your guest touch upon the harms of seed oils and the direct relationship to obesity over the last century? Sugar intake is not the primary cause and never has been. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. Okay. So actually, I love this question. On our podcast, we actually hosted Dr. Chris Kenobi, and he is saying the same thing, that sugar content has stayed relatively stable. It's the seed oils. So yes, this is, a very great comment. I'm so glad she brought this up. So seed oils are incredibly damaging to the body. And even from a common sense perspective, if you think of it, that you have the whole seed, right? And that's what God gave us, is the seed. But what they're doing is they're using high temperatures and usually chemicals, toxic chemicals, to actually pull this oil out of the seeds. And God gave us foods to be eaten in its entire package, right? To be eaten with the enzymes, for example, with these other micronutrients to help us digest and absorb those foods. Well, they've chemically extracted, and used heat to make these seed oils. And we have seen, and Dr. Kenobi does a great job of graphically presenting these in pictures in his book. It's very startling because you see, as our increased consumption of these seed oils has continued and increased, it tracks almost perfectly with numerous different chronic diseases. So there's a definite correlation. We also know that, we didn't used to have these seed oils, like, before the Industrial Revolution, we didn't have these seed oils. We were consuming animal fats and, butter, for example, and we did not have.
Tallow, butter, yeah.
That's right. And I document this in the book as well. We didn't have all of these chronic diseases. Now, there are a lot of things that have changed in our food supply. Grass chemicals, the GMOs, the pesticides, the herbicides, the hormones. A lot of things have changed that are all contributing to this explosion in chronic illnesses. But you cannot overlook how our macronutrient content and the source of those macronutrients has changed. And one of those is flipping the amount of fat we consume and the source of fat. So we used to eat a relatively high fat diet, before the dietary guidelines came around. And I mean, there's all kinds of estimates, but a solid estimate is that we consumed maybe around 45% of our calories from fat before the dietary guidelines came about. And we were consuming it, like we said, from tallow and lard and whatnot. And then the dietary guidelines came about and they told us fat was bad, carbs were good, and we flipped our ratio, right? Low fat. We got sicker and we changed because of the ratio, but we also got sicker because we replaced those fats, which we ate, since the beginning of time in a lot of cases. We replaced them with seed oils.
Yeah,
And
the
again,
fat.
that was corrupt. That was a
Yeah,
totally corrupt thing at that time as well. We don't have time to go into all that, but that was another toxic that was pushed on us. Industry benefited while we did not. But absolutely, in my family, we avoid we avoid the seed oils at all costs.
that's what canola oil, sunflower oil,
Yes,
um,
safflower oil.
safflower
It's
oil,
going to be soybean oil,
soybean oil.
corn
Yeah, yeah.
oil, all sunflower seed oil. So, cod liver oil is is a good one if people wanted to supplement with something. That's one of those more whole food supplements I like. So I'm not clumping that one in as long as you get a good source of cod liver oil, because there's a lot of those on the market that can be oxidized and not preserved properly. But if you get a good source of cod liver oil, that could be a good supplement. So we're not talking about things like that. We're talking about like those hateful eight, seed oils that are really being pushed by the industry. Dr. Kenobi talks about how um, avocado oil and coconut oil are probably neutral.
Neutral. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Uh, Bill Gates' appeal couldn't pass FDA approval for a coating, but it did pass before harvest ingredient of some sort. So that's another dangerous item out there. Um, I just answered that. She just answered that. JC says, OMG, I'm a big fan of Dr. Sina and Joel Salatin. So you've got fans here.
Oh, thanks.
Either way, it's on your fruits and vegetables. They make organic food so expensive. It wouldn't be so expensive if everybody bought organic, guys. The price will go down. It'll change the whole industry. I think that's what the guest is saying. Sina's saying, Dr. McCullough. Um, let's see. People are saying hi. Oh, margarine is another one, I think.
Yes.
That's margarine from plastics, so stay away from that too. That's another one. Flies won't eat it. You can leave
Oh
it out.
gosh.
Fly won't eat the margarine.
I know
So
Crisco. Oh my goodness. Like we had Crisco growing up in my house and I can't believe it now. But I mean, trans fats are a consequence of the grass loophole, you know? I mean, these are all pushed by industry.
JC says she listens. Somebody's listening to your podcast. She says, or he is misleading. Organic is misleading and unreliable now,
Yeah.
which Dr. Sina talks about all the time on her Beyond Labels, which you can see this if you're watching it on YouTube, X, Rumble, Rockfin. You'll see a link. You can go to her website and you can click through and see the podcast. It's at least one place where you can see it. And that her website is her full name with the doctor. So it's drsinamccullough.com. You'll see that here. So I just need a few more comments. Let's see. JC asks, could Dr. Sina talk about how the studies that misled people into thinking that saturated fats are bad?
I would love to do that. Okay. So, when we got that saturated fat cap, that 10% saturated fat cap, that's actually a relic from the 1950s, even though it's still to this day a bedrock of our nutrition policy. So that started with the lipid hypothesis, where they thought that if you ate saturated fat like butter and red meat, it would raise cholesterol, and that high cholesterol would cause heart disease. But even at the time when this became the bedrock of our policy, the theory was actually shockingly weak. It was inspired by studies on rabbits, which rabbits are herbivores. They were not designed to metabolize dietary cholesterol, but they gave these rabbits cholesterol and they're like, oh, look, now they have plaque, And there was a single observational study by Dr. Ansel Keys, and that was his 7 countries study. That study was deeply flawed. It claimed to find a correlation between fat intake and heart disease, but he actually cherry picked his data. There were 22 countries that he collected data from, but he used 7 that fit his hypothesis. He ignored nations like France and West Germany. He collected data from Greece during Lent when they were abstaining from animal foods. So he created this distorted picture of what their true diet was. And actually, his study included almost 13,000 men, but they only recorded the diet from 5% of the participants. So that 10% cap on saturated fat was largely based on data from about 500 people. Now, what's really fascinating to me is that in the 1960s and 70s, like while all of this was going on and Ansel Keys was still at the forefront, like preaching this low-fat diet to us, governments around the world started recognizing that observational studies like his were not enough data. So they started funding large randomized controlled trials to try to get to the bottom of it. And these, what we call these core trials, they tested the diet heart hypothesis on about 67,000 people. They all lasted between 1 to 7 years, and they compared the saturated fat intake that was standard at the time, which was between 12 and 18% of calories. They compared that against a diet where saturated fat was actually replaced with PUFAs, with the polyunsaturated vegetable oils. And they looked at heart attacks and death. So the totality of this data did not support Ansel Keys' hypothesis. And reducing saturated fat did not stop deaths from heart attack. Oh, sorry. Yeah, from heart attack. So what was really, really bad about this is that two of the most rigorous studies were actually buried. So these two studies showed harm when they replaced saturated fat with vegetable oils. It actually showed damage. One of these was the Minnesota coronary experiment, and it was the largest double-blind randomized control trial of its kind. It involved over 9,000 patients that were institutionalized, so they can actually control the diet. And what happened was the full data wasn't actually published. It was kept hidden. And it wasn't until 2011, which you'll probably get a kick out of this, there was a researcher from NIH, and he actually tracked down the son of the lead investigator of the study, because the lead investigator had died by this time. So he found his son. His son went to his childhood home and rummaged through the basement, and he found the raw data on like ancient magnetic computer tapes. They were in these old cardboard boxes. And when this NIH scientist analyzed the recovered data, he was shocked because the vegetable group did lower their cholesterol, but for every 30 milligram per deciliter drop in cholesterol, they had a 22% higher risk of death. Right. And then we saw the same thing, a similar situation with the Sydney diet heart study, which was also in the 60s and 70s. That same NIH researcher, he resurrected data from that study that was also suppressed. And that study also tested replacing saturated fat with safflower oil. So, a seed oil. And the results show that the group consuming the vegetable oil had significantly higher risk of death from heart disease. So these studies were actually gold standards. If you think about how they were done, they were not these observational studies. These were actually double-blind placebo-controlled studies.
Real science studies.
Real science. And, it just may be a coincidence, but that first study, the Minnesota coronary experiment, it just happened to be co-led by Ansel Keys.
Right. So like you see the same names pop up over and over again.
Same names. And they knew it. They knew it even at the time. There was the, in 1977, Senator McGovern released the dietary goals for the United States. And this was the first government document to explicitly set this arbitrary cap of 10% saturated fat. There were vocal critics at that time. I mean, there was the director of NIH admitting on record that they didn't know if lowering cholesterol would actually decrease your risk of heart attack. He said it was presumptive and unproven. And it goes on and on. There's a clinical research director saying the proof isn't there. There was a doctor from a university who was an expert in this field, and he was literally pleading for more research before they announced this decision to the American public. But politics doesn't wait for science. Senator McGovern actually was on record famously saying that senators don't have the luxury that research scientists do to wait until all the evidence is in. So they pushed it through.
Yeah. Unbelievable. 1011 says, thank you for answering my question. Thanks, guys.
Sorry if I ramble on.
No, it's great. I mean, you're so knowledgeable. I'm just amazed. Part of a personal story. Just sub to your channel, so thanks. Backyard animals won't eat a kernel of GMO corn when placed on a stick. They will, however, eat the entire stick of organically grown. Yeah, see, the animals won't eat some of the stuff.
Yeah, Jeffrey Smith, who was really the first one out there in front of this GMO issue, he documents that in one of his books of all these different types of animals, livestock and wild animals, who will totally avoid the GMOs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, we should follow their lead.
Right. They're smart. So
Yes,
that's it. The hateful eight is the one: safflower, sunflower,
that's right.
soybean, corn, canola, cottonseed. Yeah, so be careful.
Yeah, isn't that crazy that we eat cottonseed? I mean, it's
Yes.
cottonseed oil. I mean, it's
It's
cotton, but that's how far our food has fallen from being real food to these, industrial byproducts.
Dr. Sina McCullough, we are at the hour mark. Kind of went over the time limit, but there's just so much to talk about. We barely covered some of the stuff in your book. You see the website here. There's links to your podcast. So I'll put a link to the book. The book is available now. You can get it wherever, Amazon, Kindle. There's an audiobook, paperback. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed before we wrap it up?
The one thing I would like to leave everybody with is that my healing journey and my family's healing journey, it is a testimony, proof that even in a broken system, you can heal yourself and you can thrive, right? We just need to stay positive. We need to know our role. We need to know where the solutions are. And then we just need to speak with our dollars. But we all can thrive in this system. We just have to harness our God-given power.
Amen. Everybody needs to heal too. Everybody has some kind of chronic illness or short-term thing. Like,
Hmm.
well, how did I get sick like that? You might have been
Right.
exposed to some of the stuff.
Hmm.
That's the whole thing, is like, wow, maybe I got an overload of glyphosate or something. Like, you just don't know. So stay safe, stay healthy, make good decisions, and go buy this book. Go buy the book. Again, the full title of the book is Hands Off My Food: How to Defend Your Food, Health, and Freedom. And the guest, again, is Dr. Sina McCullough. And I will put links to everything in the show notes so people can just click through. Thanks so much for your time. You're really outstanding. Great, great guest. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, stay there.